This is a Willets Point Shea Stadium-bound 7 express train. The next and last stop is Willets Point, Shea Stadium.
Oh, yes, it is the Subway to Shea podcast. Anthony Rivera here with you, talking about all the news and happenings surrounding that team from Queens, the New York Mets. Episode 187 from the Subway to Shea studios in my office. Make sure to follow Subway to Shea on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me on X at AntRivera86. And subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify if you prefer to listen. But if you want to be a part of the chat, you want to be a part of the conversation, you're going to want to subscribe on YouTube. Make sure you like the video and let everyone know that this podcast is going on live right now. It's a special weeknight edition of Subway to Shea. Been doing a lot of the podcasts on Sunday, but here's the problem. Did a podcast last week on Sunday. On Monday, the Frankie Montas news came out and kind of saved it for Sunday and was kind of going by the wayside after that. Did a podcast this past Sunday. And then the news comes out on Sean Manaea and Nick Madrigal. And I said I couldn't wait. And I got my good friend joining me today, Andrew Tredinnick, Mets beat reporter for NorthJersey.com and The Record. You can follow him at Andrew_Tred. Andrew, my friend, thanks so much for joining us on such short notice.
Thanks, Ant, for having me. Yeah, everything was rolling along in spring, and then Mendy dropped a bombshell on us yesterday morning. So yeah, another starting pitching injury in spring. It's become the norm, and we'll see how they attack this one moving forward.
Every year, I feel like there's some injury in spring. Every single year, there's some injury to the rotation, and it's definitely sort of different in this David Stearns world of Mets pitching, because he's really towing the line here when it comes to not having a kind of a set rotation and what he does. I mean, it could be seen as a positive, and it also could be seen as a negative. Obviously, they are running through depth right now, but the positive is, like, what happens if this were to have happened to Corbin Burns at 8 years, $200 million, or Max Fried at the same price point, so that's why I guess he does this type of rotation that he's put together. But man, to expect the same kind of output that we got from the 2024 team and asking for lightning in a bottle for the second season in a row, you're really, towing that line, and it could backfire.
Yeah, it's interesting, with the way that the front office attacked this, coming in, as far as, you re-sign Sean Manaea, Luis Severino is gone. And then you add from the fringe, with Griffin Canning, Clay Holmes. That's going to be the key here, for the first few weeks, in the transition. Obviously results have been strong and encouraging here early in spring, but is that transition, that first month, how is he going to handle it? How is that going to unfold? Do you like what you see with his changeup? Obviously 3 perfect innings in his first spring start. He's ahead of, a lot of the starters. But the emphasis is on him. It's on Kodai Senga and his health. And, obviously we haven't seen him beyond live batting practice. The biggest thing here is, just the optimism. I know, obviously, you're dealing with Manaea and the injury, but Mendoza doesn't seem to think it's too severe. That timeline, if everything goes as planned, the recovery, not going to require a PRP injection or anything like that. Maybe mid to late April. That's the most optimistic outlook. And, maybe that's 2-3 turns in the rotation. So, it's better that it's happening here, with a month runway before the season than if it had happened in, maybe 2-3 weeks. The Mets, taking that cautious approach, getting the MRI, and it revealed what it is. But, it is tough to swallow. It's a guy that could have been your opening day starter, and now he's on the shelf to start the season. So, you're relying on Kodai Senga, Clay Holmes. Obviously we saw what David Peterson was late last season. And then beyond that, a lot of question marks. Griffin Canning, Paul Blackburn, a guy that's coming off that spinal the leak repair, and then Tyler McGill, who's looked sharp in spring. I will say that, he was in live BP. Francisco Lindor was giving him some good looks, seemed like he liked what he was seeing early here in spring with Tyler McGill, but obviously the starting rotation losing, Manaea and Montas here early in the season, early in the spring, it's, not ideal, moving forward. So we'll see how they attack it and who kind of comes out on top there in that competition for that fifth, sixth spot.
Andrew, Tyler McGill always finds his way to get into this. There's always an injury for Tyler McGill to get himself into this rotation. I want to get a little bit into Sean Manaea, but since you mentioned Tyler McGill, what is it that has kind of changed for him this offseason that, even to what we saw towards last September, the end of September, where he really helped his team get into the postseason?
I think you look at Tyler McGill, obviously he's his own harshest critic, and I think that's the biggest thing. You look at where he was 3 years ago. He was a 3-pitch guy, and now he's evolved. He added that American spork. He's added a cutter. He's trying to, manipulate his repertoire to be the most well-rounded pitcher that he can be. I spoke with him earlier this spring, and he talked a little bit about the fact that he got away maybe a little bit too much from his fastball, was incorporating that cutter a little bit too much. So I think it's a guy that he's a constant ticker. You like the velocity, you like that upper 90s stuff. He even almost touched 100 miles per hour at points last season. You like that guy. It's just a matter of the command. That's something he brought up when I spoke with him. Not giving, up free base runners. The stuff is good, and it's just kind of chiseling away at, what best suits him. That fastball is kind of the key thing, the slider. The stuff is there. He proved it there down the stretch late last season, when the Mets needed him, came up in a big spot there. So, it'll be curious. He's a guy that has one minor league option remaining. Griffin Canning and Paul Blackburn do not. So kind of how do the Mets massage that? Is he, in the bullpen to start the year? It'll be interesting to see. Obviously those two guys, they're not going anywhere. So we'll see, early in the season where he kind of fits in.
Yeah, the thing with McGill is we know that he has the arsenal. We know that he has the stuff, but to be consistent and to have the stamina, right? He'll pitch good for 3 to 4 innings, and then he just kind of falls apart. And then I know people want to see him in the bullpen. As Rosie K says, he's too inconsistent. He belongs in the bullpen. Same thing with Carlos Ramos saying Tyler McGill's not a starter and will never be one. McGill gives you 2 to 3 innings, and that's not a reliable starter for a contender. The only problem is we have nothing else at the moment in time, especially considering that the Mets want to stay in-house. And shout out to everyone in the chat here. Carlos, Rosie K, Truman Quinn in the house, Top Bunk Sports, appreciate you. Nelson Cruz, Brad, appreciate everyone in the chat. Just leave your comments and questions here. We'll try to get to as many as possible. So let's get into what is this injury for Sean Manaea. Right oblique strain. He'll be on the IL to start the season. Felt discomfort at the beginning of camp, just like Frankie Montas did. He did not recover the way he wanted to, and for that, he's being shut down for the next few weeks and begins the season, like I mentioned, on the IL. Not to mention the fact that, just like Montas, when he's able to throw again, he still has to go through spring training, although it feels like it's going to be a lot less, like you mentioned, Mendy saying that he feels a lot less worried about this. And I do have the quote from Carlos Mendoza. And he said that we've been talking about our depth, and here we are getting tested. The way I see it, guys will get opportunities. We'll still feel really good with what we have internally. With Manaea, I'm not overly concerned. There's been a lot of talk from Manaea, from Stearns and from Mendoza about staying in-house. And that's been the talk, because there's free agents available out there. You look at Jose Quintana, who a lot of Met fans would like to see come back. He was pretty stable in the rotation, especially towards the end where, you talk about Tyler McGill September. I think Jose Quintana was the best pitcher of them all. And it was crazy to see. He only gave up 3 earned runs in the month of September, which is crazy to think of. If you want to go in a different route, obviously there's Kyle Gibson, who had the highest WAR of all the free agents left over. Patrick Corbin, Lance Lynn, Anthony DeSclafani, Zach Davis, Spencer Turnbull, and Alex Wood. You look at these names, though, and you think outside of Quintana and Gibson, are any of them really that much better than going with Paul Blackburn, Griffin Canning, and Tyler McGill?
Yeah, and that's the biggest thing is where you look where the Mets are payroll-wise, and anything they pay at this point in time, after they add Pete Alonso, is 110%. So you look at a guy like Jose Quintana, I would assume after the way he closed the season, he's going to be asking north of $10 million. That's going to cost you $20 million. And the Mets front office, it has made a point that, they're willing to spend, but, at what point, are they going to cap it off? And I know we spoke with Steve Cohen a little bit earlier in the spring, talking about having some financial flexibility come the trade deadline. You don't want to, shoot your shot early in the season when you have, some depth there. When down the line, maybe there's a bigger need. So, I think as Carlos Mendoza said, they're going to fill internally. If they have another injury, I think that's a different case where you might have to go outside what the organization has to offer. You look at kind of the depth piece with Waddell, Justin Hageman. You don't want maybe those guys to be in the rotation, but where you are right now, you have 6 guys, major league experience, and to start the season, I think you can roll with that, kind of maybe rely on the offense and kind of see where that takes you. I don't think it's not panic mode just yet. We'll see beyond April, where the team is standing and go from there.
Well, like we mentioned earlier, the positives that to take out of this, and, you always have to look at the other side of the line. The tendon was not involved in this injury. The rib cage, he is safe and is good. It was just a muscle strain. So, hopefully this is a quick and easy, go around for Sean Manaea. He comes back. Thankfully, like we talked about off air, this happens now and not during the middle of the season where you have all these days off. You're not really implementing the 6-man rotation right out the bat. You're going to go with the 5-man. And at the very least, if the Mets can, at least tread water, and who knows, maybe they'll have a better start to the season. But if they can just keep it to where, this team is, not out of it right from the start. And we've seen them come back from 10 to 12 games under 500 and get back in the race. But you don't want to do that every single year. You want to get off to a good start. You want to, build momentum and, get in front of teams early and quick, because this National League is super tough. You talk about the Dodgers are the top echelon of teams. You look at Arizona, you look at San Diego. In the East, you got the Phillies and the Braves. So the Mets really have to not fall behind, because not every year they're going to have this opportunity to get to within a game into the playoffs. And they did it because Arizona kind of fell apart at the end of the season there. Otherwise, that probably wouldn't have happened. So you don't want to have to rely on luck every single season. You want some, sureness and the ability to have this team win on a consistent basis. I look at the rotation, and this is the original graphic that I had at the start of spring. Obviously, was Manaea, Senga. You could either one of those, 1A, however you want to put it, David Peterson, Montas, Clay Holmes. And then that final spot was, for Blackburn, Canning. I didn't put Tyler McGill at the time, but that was before we found out what Mendy had in store for him and Budo. I also had Brandon Sprode up here, which I would assume he'd have to have an absolutely stellar spring training to even be considered for the role. But then you look at the rotation now, and I kind of took it from your article. And if you guys out there in the chat, please check out Andrew Tredinnick on The Record and NorthJersey.com. This is the rotation that you had put since this week started, and you had Kodai Senga, David Peterson, number 2, Clay Holmes at number 3, then Blackburn, Canning, and Tyler McGill. And the depth you mentioned, Justin Hageman, Brandon Waddle, you don't want to get that far. We talked about them. The chances for Brandon Sproat I want to know about from you. But first, we saw Max Kranick this weekend and him pitch. What are your thoughts on him and his opportunity? He looked pretty good during his spring outing.
Yeah, I mean, I think he fits the bill, but Carlos Mendoza had said, throughout spring that they're going to build up as a multi-inning reliever, similar to Jose Butto. Obviously last year he opened the spring as a starter, so he's getting used to that multi-inning role. It's something that he talked about, just the adjustment, pitching day to day versus having the recovery time as a starter. So I don't think he's in the mix here as a starting pitcher. I think you look at those 3 guys and then those 2 on the periphery, Waddell and Hageman at this moment in time. And then the prospects, I think, Brand Sproat, like you mentioned, a guy like Blade Tidwell, I think there's still some development time for those guys before they can break in. But, we'll see just as this depth unfolds, kind of what rises to the surface here. But not Kranick. I think Mendoza said he's going to be building up for that multi-inning role, which is all the more important if you roll with a 6-man rotation there in the early month, to have those guys that can eat some innings if something goes awry, a short start or something like that.
I know they want to stay in-house, but how many injuries will it take to them to consider going outside? There are some people in the chat, I'm Right podcast, Nick Durst saying, I told you since September we needed Quintana back. Carlos Ramos saying Quintana is the move with this potential lineup. We're not signing Quintana to win a Cy Young. We just need him to eat 6 innings per start and hand it to the bullpen to shut it down. Was there, obviously they're saying to keep everything in-house, but has there been any talks at all about a reunion with Jose Quintana?
It doesn't appear that way at this point in time. I feel like they built this pitching staff to weather something like this. It's just happened to come a little bit earlier than they may have, forecast. Beyond that, I think, maybe if one more injury does set in, I think then maybe your hand starts to slide a little bit towards the panic button more so. But at this point in time, you have, I know it's not ideal, but you have, 3 guys that have major league experience to fill 2 spots, down the rotation. And then you hope that Manaea's recovery, is on the right side of April, maybe early May. So yeah, I think, they're dealing with it internally, and beyond that, one more injury I think might set you a little bit towards the panic mode. But at this point in time, still early. Manaea recovery. Hope it goes a little bit quicker. So,
well, Truman Quinn says it's time to panic. I mean, I think it's. I honestly think it's still early. I don't want to be that the ultra positive guy, but like we said, if it's going to happen at any time, let it be spring training. Let it be where, the team has the most days off. But I do understand, the sentiment because, as Carlos Ramos says here, we cannot do that, this season. If we're having that kind of a start, it would mean that we're killing a potentially good bullpen. And the bullpen right now on paper looks pretty solid. And I thought last season as well that it kind of looks solid. And then, the starting pitching was not getting you 5-6 innings. So we would see Reed Garrett be thrown out there on a daily basis and get used so much that he had to end up on the injured list. And then they had to monitor Edwin Diaz. So, there is concern that even though that they have this depth, is this depth going to give the team the length needed every start? I know it's going to take a while to build up to, but they really do need these guys at the bare minimum going 5 innings. They're going to need 5 innings from Griffin Canning and Paul Blackburn and Tyler McGill. Are these guys up to the task, though, to get it done?
Yeah, and that's going to be the biggest question, right? And that's what's interesting is we haven't even seen, we've seen live bullpens out of these guys, but we haven't seen them in game action yet. So from our perspective, we're still getting a feel about, kind of what these guys are. It's all kind of, based on the past numbers, and you hope your pitching staff or your coaching staff, like Jeremy, guys get in the pitching lab, and we've seen kind of how they can kind of mold these pitchers. And you look at the bullpen last season, what you came in with, Brooks Raley goes down, and Reed Garrett was in the minor leagues to begin the year. I think there was only 3 pitchers on the opening day roster that you ended up finishing this season with, and you saw what the development staff was able to do. Reed Garrett, Jose Buto, Dednell Nunez, what that bullpen became. Maybe they could do something similar with, obviously, Paul Blackburn had 3 quality starts out of his first 5 starts with the team before he goes down, gets, that comebacker with the line drive and everything he had to deal with his back. Tyler McGill closed the season strong. I think the pitching staff appears to be pretty optimistic about what they can do with Griffin Canning and his kind of pitchability and how he can work, when they get their hands on him. So I think, obviously early in the season, see what those guys are capable of, and kind of go from there. And obviously, I feel like you have to feel confident about what this, coaching staff, the pitching lab, what they've been able to do with a lot of these guys. So if there's an optimistic take, let's go with that one. So, we'll see what these guys are capable of, but we have yet to see. We've seen live batting practices, bullpens. Let's see what they look like in the spring before we, kind of panic.
Yeah. And, we go into certain seasons, you look at the Mets lineup and on paper it looks fantastic, right? And then something happens, something goes wrong, injuries happen, and it just derails things. And you look at the pitching staff, and on paper it doesn't look great. But the fact that Jeremy Hefner and the pitching lab and what they did last year, the way that David Stearns was able to pivot, and if someone wasn't pitching well or playing well, they were off the roster. He made major trades at the deadline, whether it was bringing in Winker or even Paul Blackburn. Even though he got hurt, he had a couple of good starts. But you talk about the bullpen and bringing in Ryan Stanek and to a certain extent, Phil Maton, who he kind of led the charge for the second half of the season. So he really knows how to manipulate the roster. And I do think that I do have trust in him in case something goes wrong, that he will be able to, turn the corner here. We quickly mentioned Kodai Senga, so I want to bring this comment up from Rosie K saying, should we be concerned about Senga not pitching in any Grapefruit League games just yet?
No, yeah, we talked with Mendoza about that today, and obviously they're being a lot more deliberate with Kodai Senga. Coming off the injuries, and just he's a guy that's, he's very methodical, very deliberate with the way he kind of goes about his business. Obviously, last year we saw, after the shoulder injury, just the mechanical things that he was going with, trying to hone in on that. Talked a little bit about today about kind of the timeline for him. They'd like to see him throw 2 ups, 3 ups in a live bullpen setting before we see him in game action. But they just appear to be kind of going about it a little bit slower with Kodai Senga. But the early returns have been good. He touched 96, I believe, in his first live bullpen session. So just taking it more deliberately. Obviously that's just the way he goes about things. And we saw it all last year. He wants to be at a place where, everything's kind of in the right direction before he faces hitters. So I don't think anything to worry about at this point in time with Senga. I know everything he's gone through, you get a little bit worried, but I think everything appears on the right track.
Yeah, and they're really going to need him to spearhead that rotation, especially at the start of the season. And then eventually, once they start making this 6-man rotation, I think it could only help him, one, stay healthy, and two, get into that rhythm that he did towards the end of the 2023 season, where he was a very important part of them winning some games towards the end of that season. I want to switch gears here. The other injury that took place, which is the one that I thought that we were only going to be talking about on Monday, but Nick Madrigal ended up fracturing his shoulder, dislocation, playing shortstop of all things. He's really not been playing shortstop, but on Saturday in the first inning, his first action in the game, just falling there on a throw and fracturing his shoulder. He's on the 60-day IL there. Madrigal was, he really was never a given to me, though he was replacing Jose Iglesias. He even took his number, but I never thought it was guaranteed that he would get that final spot on the roster. Yes, he's more of a veteran presence, and obviously, like I said, he fits that Iglesias type mold of the veteran player, but I thought it was still up for grabs, whether it was him, whether it's Luis Angel Acuna or Brett Beatty. Now, Acuna is 1 for 6 so far, has an RBI, a run and stolen base, had a pretty good start to the game on Tuesday. Brett Beatty has been 5 for 8, a home run, an RBI, and 3 runs so far. Obviously, you do have Jose Iglesias out there as well, that if they decide to bring him back, but it just doesn't seem like, as even with the Jose Quintana too, it just doesn't seem like those two guys are going to be coming back. So it really does feel like a 2-man race for that final spot there. Luis Angel Acuna, Brett Beatty, how do you have that playing out as we get to the end of spring training?
Yeah, and that's kind of the biggest question as far as positional battles. We came in with a more refined roster this year than maybe years past. Obviously with the third base being kind of settled with Mark Vientos and what he did last year. The biggest thing there, in that infield spot is obviously Mendoza's preached all spring training about versatility. The ability to play kind of multiple positions, because with the way the outfield is positioned with Starling Marte and Jesse Winker as your DHs, then Luis Torrens, you're going to need someone that's able to kind of work all the way around the infield, give McNeil some time, work behind Vientos. The biggest question is kind of shortstop, but is that really a question? Because Francisco Lindor tends to play 150 games a year, so it's more of an emergency case. Right now, Brett Beatty, he's working mainly at second base and third base. Luis Angel Acuna has that shortstop position, that experience. He broke in as a shortstop. But do you want to kind of stunt his development, the ability to get regular at-bats, 4 at-bats a game? Beatty has excelled at AAA. We've seen that. It's just a matter of who's going to sit and wait, who's going to not have that regular playing time. I think at this point, maybe you give the leg up to Brett Beatty because, like we mentioned, he's excelled at AAA. Luis Angel Acuna hasn't proven that. I know he kind of starred there late in the regular season, but that's such a small sample size. At the major league level, these pitchers have the ability to poke holes in what you're capable of. So it's just the versatility. I think Beatty might have the leg up at this point in time, but he's gonna need to prove, in practice, maybe he can field shortstop. If an issue presents itself, maybe you can call on Luis Angel Acuna to come up. So it is an interesting debate. Obviously, we still have a month. Beatty has proven it in the spring before. Are they willing to let him sit on the bench? It's a very interesting debate here early in spring.
Yeah, that's the thing too. It's like they don't want to stunt Acuna's growth, but still the same thing applies to Beatty. Although exactly. He's been in the major leagues and had his cup of coffee, the problem is that he's also still kind of prospectish, I guess is the term I'm trying to look for. So either or, I don't know. Could they bring back Jose Iglesias? It just doesn't seem like that. Seems like the most logical answer if you want to keep Acuna down in AAA, and if you want to not stun Brett Beatty's growth either. The most logical thing to me is to bring back Jose Iglesias because he can come off at the bench. You can know he play multiple positions as well as play shortstop. So I feel like that, outside of the pitching situation where they're not going outside, I feel like this is more of the necessary move to bring back Jose Iglesias and, forget about OMG and all that stuff, but his vibes are still going to run rampant on the team. And I think it would be wise for them to go back to him if they don't want to mess the development of Acuna and Brett Beatty.
Yeah, I mean, there is a case to be made for that, but what is he going to be asking after he bats, 340 last season? It's pretty crazy, what he was able to do. I just think they want to give the younger guys reps, and maybe this is a case where, it is Brett Beatty's time to make that jump and perform. It just doesn't appear at this point in time that Iglesias is going to be coming back. I know it hurts Mets fans to hear that, after all he brought to the table, but it seems like they want to give the young guys an opportunity, not really kind of close off that spot and have it open to kind of, flow through. So I don't see it happening at this point.
Yeah, and I get it. I totally get it. And I'm for them going, for the younger players. I just hope that they are up to the task, that they know that if they're coming up with this roster, it's probably not to be a starter, because unless they trade, Jeff McNeil or they move Starling Marte, outside of those two players, there's not really much space on this roster. It's pretty much set, especially with, the return of Pete Alonso, kind of set everything for the roster and the lineup moving forward. The Mets did make another move, and they made a trade for Alexander Canario from the Chicago Cubs in exchange for cash considerations. He'll be on the 40-man roster with the Madrigal injury. The thing with him is, and this is where the trade confuses me a little bit, he's out of options. So he needs to break camp with the team or be made available via trade or waivers. So I don't really understand this move. I know that there was a lot of hype on Canario and that there was a lot of talk of why did the Cubs let him go. But where do the Mets fit in these plans with a guy like Canario?
It honestly perplexed me just as much as you did, Ant. But I guess, it's good to have depth. I don't know how you feel about where the corner outfield spot is beyond Soto, beyond Nimmo. Maybe something opens up, someone gets hurt. We were talking to Mendy, and when he said no minor league options, we're like, that's kind of interesting that they brought this guy in. But I think, Mendy kind of touted the pop that he has in his bat. So I guess we'll see if something opens up, maybe he, clears waivers. I don't know exactly kind of where that lies. So I think they're just, optimistic about the talent there. And if an opportunity opens itself up, you have a guy that some young talent there that can maybe fill in. But like you mentioned, it kind of caught me off guard that, a corner outfielder with no options joined the team. So we'll see kind of, if you never know what happens in spring, an opportunity could open itself up. So we'll see.
The only two ideas that I got out of this were, one, could there be a trade in motion here? And two, what is the health of Brandon Nimmo? Now, I know he's coming off the plantar fasciitis, but, he was I think the number what they said was 91% healthy or something. Yeah. 90, very specific. Yeah. So very specific on his health, but do they want him playing in the outfield to start this season? We all know every season Brandon Nimmo misses the first couple of weeks, or he just doesn't play the first couple of weeks of Grapefruit League games. Is there any concern coming out of Port St. Lucie with Brandon Nimmo playing in the outfield to start this season?
I don't think at this point in time that there is, but maybe Canario is that maybe safety net in case a guy needs to start the year on the IL, something like that. Maybe Marte with his knee. Obviously he's not fully healthy. He's another guy that's starting the spring slow. But Brandon seemed to be optimistic about where his health was. We haven't seen him. We've seen him hit. We've seen him run. Take fielding drills, live BP, and stuff like that. I think we can expect him, in the first or second week of March. Obviously, with the plantar fasciitis, the last few years, it's been a case where he's just building up his durability. But now with the foot, it's something to definitely keep an eye on throughout the spring. But I think Brandon seemed optimistic when we spoke with him. Didn't seem like he was having any issues. Kind of a slow progression with his running, putting, more weight on that foot, pushing it to 100%. So I don't think you have to worry at this point in time, but, Canario is an interesting case. I think he probably provides a safety net there in case anything happens with, Marte or Nimmo, beyond the first few weeks of action here in the Grapefruit League.
Well, as we wrap up this podcast, this little abbreviated version, I hope that nothing happens tomorrow. I like a nice, calm day tomorrow, no injuries. Let's just chill and have a good next couple of weeks as these guys get healthy here. Shout out 101 people in this room for this short notice podcast that I'm doing here. Usually we do Sundays, and we'll be moving to Sunday night, probably starting this weekend. Been doing it at Sunday mornings during the off season, during football season, but now that the games are back on, I think it's time to go back to the evenings. So we'll be doing Sunday evenings, and you will see a lot of my good friend here, Andrew Tredinnick, on the podcast this entire season. Andrew, let everyone know where they can follow you if they're not doing that already, and what you got coming up.
Thanks, Ant. Yeah, follow me on Twitter or X at Andrew_Tred. And at northjersey.com. I publish all my stuff there. Looking forward to the next few weeks. I'll be back home, writing some stories. I talked with Jet Williams, Ryan Clifford, Reed Garrett, looking forward to having some features on that and kind of how the opening day roster looks and then I'll be back for the last week of spring training heading into opening day in Houston. So yeah, make sure to stay tuned for all the coverage. It's been a fun few weeks here in Port St. Lucie, and news as always. But it's good to be back, in the baseball world here. So it's been fun.
Yeah, it felt like for the first time in a long time, it's felt like this Mets year. It's kind of been all year round. I know 2023 was a little tough and the season ended bad, but from 2024 to now, it just felt like it hasn't ended. And that's the way we like it. I mean, that's the way I like it. I always like to hear Mets news, and it helps out the podcast to have, information and news to talk about. Andrew Tredinnick of northjersey.com and The Record, Mets beat reporter. Appreciate you always. Thank you for being a part of this podcast. Everyone, thank you so much for tuning in. You can follow Subway to Shea on X, Instagram, and TikTok at Subway to Shea. You can follow me on X at AntRivera86. Make sure you subscribe on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. This will be up later tonight for all you audio listeners. And if you're a part of the YouTube, you're subscribing, you're liking, you're being a part of the chat as well. So shout out to the 102 of you that were here. That wraps up the Subway to Shea podcast. For Anthony Rivera, always remember, let's go Mets.